In 1946, moviegoers got their first glimpse of an astonishing new machine.
Are people becoming obsolete? A giant electronic brain has started cogitating at the University of Pennsylvania. It's made of vacuum tubes like your radio, and it can add up a column of figures a yard long in a second. It's the world's first electronic computer. Right now, it's solving mathematical problems for the U.S. Army, but who knows, someday a machine like this may check up on your income tax.
The computer was called ENIAC, and in 1946, few people thought that such machines had a future outside the scientific laboratory. Costing the equivalent of $3 million, it calculated so quickly that people predicted that only a handful of computers would ever be needed, 6 in America and 3 in England. The very idea that there could ever be a computer business was ridiculed.
People thought that the market for the machines was just for a few or a few dozen at most, and the market would saturate, and then who would want any more? It's like you were trying to make a business of making atom smashers. Maybe you could make a little money on 1 or 2, but then what would you do for an encore?
Though built for the military, ENIAC was the brainchild of 2 young civilians, J. Presper Eckert and John Walkley. In 1946, they left the university and set out to start a business selling computers. They found little enthusiasm for their idea.
Generally speaking, when we talk to businessmen and banks, financial institutions at that time, they took a very dim view of all this, and they really didn't have enough insight to see into the future far enough to believe anything like this could work. My father signed a note at the bank for $25,000, which helped us get started until we could get going.
With this modest sum, Presper Eckert and John Walkley launched the world's first commercial computer company. This small Philadelphia firm constituted the entire world computer industry in 1946. The first order of business for the 2 entrepreneurs was to find a customer for their product. But who would want to buy such a complex and delicate scientific machine?
When Eckert and Walkley proposed to make a commercial venture out of building and selling electronic computers, a lot of people were very skeptical, and they raised a number of very interesting objections. The first one was that the machine was made out of large numbers of vacuum tubes, and these tubes were prone to burning out. In fact, if you could keep one of these machines running for a few hours before a vacuum tube burned out, you considered that great.
But a worse problem was the machine's complexity. To make a computer do what you wanted was no easy task.
You almost required an understanding of very advanced mathematics or logic to even get the computer to add 2 numbers together. And people felt that such a talent was so rare in the world that it didn't matter if you could mass produce the computers, you would never find enough people who had that skill to make them useful.
Undaunted, Eckert and Walkley looked for a customer with a need so desperate that they'd be willing to take a gamble on the new technology. And they found it here. The US Census Bureau employed hundreds of clerks to process population data. They were drowning in records, with enough paper to fill a football field.
They had a census coming up in a few years, and the time it took to process the census was getting longer and longer. And they are mandated by Congress to get the census done in a certain length of time because elections are based upon it. And they were fearful that in the following election they wouldn't get done in time without something better than they had.
The technology used for record keeping and accounting had been around since the turn of the century. Armies of clerks slaved away, punching data onto punch cards and then processing that information on other machines, which sorted the cards, added numbers on the cards, and printed out results. But this whole tedious process and the clerks who operated it could be replaced by one single computer. Or so Eckert and Walkley tried to convince the Census Bureau.
We thought it was magic. We didn't believe it was really feasible to begin with. As we talked more and more with them, we came to believe that they knew what they were talking about and that they had already demonstrated some important aspects of it in ENIAC.
In September 1946, the first contract for a commercial computer was signed for the price of $350,270 and not a penny more. This footage, taken with John Mauchly's home camera, gives an idea of the optimistic spirit in which this young company set out to found a new industry. They named their computer UNIVAC, for Universal Automatic Computer.